You're not limited to simply retrieving and displaying data from your database. You can very easily update it too. In this lesson, you'll update some rows in your database using LINQ. To begin, open the Spark project from your Sample Files folder. Open the code behind file of reports.aspx if it isn't open already, and remove all code from the using statement. Now add the following code to retrieve a single invoice record from the database. Invoice myInvoice equals data.invoices.single invoice lambda invoice.invoiceID equals 1882. Now add the following code to display the invoice's details on the page. Label report.text equals myInvoice.invoice number label report.text plus equals an HTML break tag label report.text plus equals myInvoice.invoiceAmount.toString. Now view reports.aspx in your browser and the invoice number and invoice amount of the invoice are displayed. Close your browser now and open reports.aspx in Design View. Now add a button control to the page just after Label Report. Set the ID property to button update invoice and set the text property to update invoice. Now add a click event handler to the button. You're going to add some code now that will update the value of invoice ID 1882. First, copy and paste the code from your page load event handler into your button update invoice click event handler. Now remove the 3 lines of code that set the value of labelReport.text. You're left with just the code that retrieves the invoice. Now add the following code to change the invoice amount property of the invoice. myInvoice.invoiceAmount equals 123. View the page in your browser now and click the button. Nothing happens when you click the button. LINQ never updates your database unless you specifically tell it to. Close your browser now and add the following code on the next line. Data.submitChanges. The submitChanges method will commit any changes that you have made to your database. If you have a large collection of data that you want to update, you still only need to call the submitChanges method once. LINQ will keep track of any changes made prior to committing them to the database. It's important to note that LINQ can only send updates to your database as long as your data context object exists and has not been disposed of. The data context object keeps track of the changes that you make to your database objects. If your data context object no longer exists, you will no longer be able to update your database by calling the Submit Changes method. View the page in your browser again and click Update Invoice. The value in the database was updated when you clicked, but this isn't apparent as the updated value isn't displayed on the screen. This is because the code in the Page Load event handler is executed before the code in the Click event handler. For more on this, see Lesson 3.2. Your Page Load event handler will have to run again in order to retrieve and display the updated values. Use your browser's refresh button to refresh the page. Now you can see the updated value of 123. As you can see, simply changing the properties of your LINQ objects and then calling the Submit Changes method allows you to update any of the values stored in your database. You can also do this with collections of data by using a for each loop and calling the Submit Changes method once it is finished. Close your web browser now. In this lesson, you updated the invoice that was displayed on the page, but the page didn't immediately display the changes that you made. Ideally, you would store the code that retrieves and displays the invoice details in a separate method that is called by both the Page Load and Button Update Invoice Click event handlers. Of course, this approach wouldn't be very efficient, as the method would be called twice when the button was clicked. You'll discover a more efficient solution in Lesson 12.10. Close Visual Studio now and you've now completed Lesson 10.7. Update database records using LINQ.